All right, this is kind of a personal story. It's pretty deep. Part 1. Ignorant folks tend to think of the American genocide as the distant past, but it's still ongoing. As Indigenous people, we hear stories of our grandparents being orphaned because of trauma due to disease, forced adoption, or forced relocation. American genocide is not the distant past. It is still ongoing. Removal of our documented relatives and instilling the fear into them of their removal is modern-day genocide. My brother, when we adopted him at 4 years old, was undocumented. We didn't speak Spanish, so he forgot his Spanish and relearned a new language, English. He was able to enroll into K-12 schools. He was 3 months older than I, while I was studying for my first semester of college that he wasn't able to enroll into, even if he wanted to. He was having a hard time finding undocumented work that used English in the workplace, so he had gone to LA to try to find work. I got the phone call that he had overdosed while I was studying for my first semester freshman biology class. We don't know if it was intentional or accidental. Systemically making it hard for grandchildren of the so-called American space, original inhabitants, that is genocide. My grandmother shared her story with me and how all of the women went to the town centers to mourn and mourn for days after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Our great-grandparents literally had borders placed on their land that made children like my brother undocumented today. Mainstream media will have you believing my brother was illegal, but my story, my brother's story, our story, will have you know that his death was an act of genocide. Suicide rates, missing, murdered Indigenous women, brown and black folks getting killed or are guilty until proven innocent, the pipeline to prison, all are modern-day acts of genocide. Part 2. Ethnocide is ongoing and all around us too. Expecting Black and Indigenous folks to forget our past and move on and to assimilate and accommodate to the dominant norm is ethnocide. Brown and Black educators who are hired at educational institutions who get the respect of our students not because we demand it, but because we remind them of their aunties or the dad they didn't have, get pushed out of these white institutions when we don't assimilate or accommodate to their norms. Not all. There are token exceptions, especially those willing to assimilate and to accommodate. It seems the more willingly folks assimilate and accommodate, the less likely they're pushed out, and the more likely they are to be whitewashed or disconnected from the margins. I'm just saying. It's like we have to choose between genocide or ethnocide. Modern-day genocide and ethnocide is all around us. In terms of what makes it to the his storybooks, the genocide therein is still passed orally via our stories. I too have read about it in some books, but to hear and listen to the stories directly passed down from grandchildren of survivors, from our elders, we feel it deeply, and it's painful. Mainstream society sees the marginalized as the others and limits our power. We see ourselves as badass descendants of survivors. We forget how powerful we are in white spaces. I try to remind my students of the power they bring into those spaces, to not shrink, but to stand tall, to be proud of who we are, to not assimilate or accommodate or negotiate our identity to make them feel comfortable. It's tough, but that's why we're still here, we exist, and we're so badass and tough.